Penny here, and today we're going to be talking about the books that I read in April. The main thing that was going on in April was the Owls Magical Readathon, and I did manage to read 12 books in order to get my Alchemist qualification. I pretty much read the books that are in my TBR, so if you want to know how the books link up to the prompts, I'll link that down below. The only thing, I did swap out this book, Death and Resurrection, for Mockingjay. This was for my Care of Magical Creatures. I actually ended up DNFing this book, which I will talk about more later, so I had to replace it. Luckily, I had Mockingjay right there waiting for me, so that was an easy swap. Now, I have already done a wrap-up for the first half of April. I will link that down below. But basically, I read these 4 books as well as some audiobooks and some ebooks and one book that I've already given back to my sister. Overall, in the first half of the month, I read some really good books, and I'm not sure that the second half of the month really lived up to that. But regardless, I'm going to run this wrap-up in the book battle format. So whatever book comes up as the champion for the second half of the month is going to go up against the champion from the first half of the month, which was Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. So we'll have to see whether I read anything good enough to beat that. But anyway, we should get into talking about the books. The book battle format means I have this little tournament and we pair up the books, battle them against each other until we figure out which book is the best. So let's start with round 1. We have Unfettered, which was edited by Sean Speakman, up against Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. Firstly, we have Unfettered, which is a fantasy short story anthology, and it has a whole bunch of really popular fantasy authors contributing to it. So I was actually going to unhaul this, and then I discovered that it's actually signed by Patrick Rothfuss. So I decided I would keep it, especially because a lot of these authors are ones that I do like. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the stories were longer than they needed to be and often didn't have a very good ending. I will admit that I listened to all of this on audiobook in the end, despite having the physical copy. I listened to it on audiobook, and I listened to it in several really big chunks, and I really think with short story anthologies you're much better off to take a little bit of a break between stories so that you can digest them. So the fact that I didn't do that is probably on me, but still I feel like very few stories have actually stuck with me. There's probably only a couple that I really liked. Also, generally the idea with this kind of anthology is that you'll get a little taste of an author and then want to read more of their work, so a lot of the stories in this are set in the author's different worlds. But actually this had the opposite effect on me. I've always been really interested in reading Naomi Novik's Temeraire series with the dragons fighting in the war, but there was a short story set in that world and I didn't like it at all. So now I'm not sure, do I even want to read that series? I don't know. So unfortunately this was slightly disappointing, but I just don't tend to like short story anthologies, so it's probably more of a me problem than a this problem, but maybe not entirely. Then the book we have battling against that is Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. So this is the third and final book of the Live Ship Traders trilogy, which is the second trilogy in the Realm of the Elderlings series by Robin Hobb. So the Realm of the Elderlings is like her bigger world, and this is the end of one part of that. It's a bit complicated. But anyway, Live Ship Traders is this amazing world where we have these ships that belong to certain families, and after they've been owned by this family for a few generations, the ships gain their own consciousness. And in the story, we're following several ships and their families, and also this pirate king who has a vision of how he would like to rule the pirate kingdom. And to do that, he steals a live ship. So in this third book, we've got a whole bunch of people coming together to try and save these live ships. There are also dragons in this story, and the way that the dragons fit in, I just thought was a really unique take on dragons, and I really loved that element. I did also listen to this on audiobook, and I enjoyed this audiobook experience a lot. One tiny thing is that it doesn't leave very big gaps between the different perspectives, so sometimes it's a little bit confusing because you'll suddenly be on the other side of the world without realizing that there's been any transition. However, I will say that quite often when I'm reading books from different perspectives, you have your favorites, and then when you go to other perspectives, you're a little bit disappointed. With this series, I just loved every character, that I was so excited to find out about what was happening in every plot thread. And the way that everything came together in the end was just masterful. I will say that a lot of really traumatic things happen in this series, so definitely trigger warnings for rape and like mutilation and all sorts of other horrible things that I can't remember, but I thought it dealt with those issues so well and I really loved it. So you can probably tell which one of these two books would win this battle. It's going to be Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. Next we have The Memory Keeper's Daughter by Kim Edwards up against Shifters by Jean Gilbert. So firstly, The Memory Keeper's Daughter is a book about a couple who have twins. It turns out that the daughter has Down syndrome, and because of the father's experience, he decides to lie to his wife and say that the daughter died. So then the daughter gets raised separately, and the mother and the brother don't know that she's alive. And throughout the book, we follow basically the influence that this girl has on their lives, even though they don't know that she exists. I do wish that there had been more in this story about the child with Down syndrome, although I will say the bit that was at the end, I wasn't really sure how accurate the representation is. Maybe it is. I couldn't really find a review by someone who has more experience with Down syndrome. And the author didn't seem to have much experience herself, but it could be accurate. Maybe she did lots of research. I'm just not sure. I will also say a lot of the characters' decisions were questionable, not just because they were bad decisions to make, like as if the characters were flawed and they made bad decisions, because it was totally that sometimes, but other times it just felt like there was no real motivation for the things they were doing. But I did really like the theme throughout this book about how life is so unknown and you can really never predict which things are going to make you happy and which things are not. So overall, I thought it was okay. Just a few strange bits. Then the next book in this battle is Shifters by Jean Gilbert. So this is a Vault agency novel. It's part of a series about this time travel agency where they send people back in time to change things for the better. And I feel like it's really hard to talk about this one. Firstly, because it is self-published. It's also a New Zealand author. And so I feel really bad that I just didn't like it. I just felt like I wanted a lot more development of what this agency was like. It didn't make a lot of sense to me. There was no real clarity about how they made the decisions about what to change. And a lot of what the characters were doing didn't make any sense. I don't know. Self-publishing is hard, time travel is hard, and so, like, good effort, but I personally didn't enjoy it at all. Maybe some people would, but not me. So, once again, the winner of this round is pretty obvious. The Memory Keeper's Daughter will be going through to the next round. Oh, this next one's going to be obvious too. I forgot to say, like, you guys should be trying to guess as early as you can which book you think is going to win. So, good luck. This round we have Magic Burns by Alona Andrews up against Death and Resurrection by R.A. McAvoy. Now, I already told you that I DNF'd Death and Resurrection. But firstly, Magic Burns. This is the second book in the Kate Daniels series. The Kate Daniels series is one of my favorite series. So I really love it. I just really love being back in the world with these characters, and as new characters get introduced to the series and I know what impact they're going to have in the long run, that's really great to see. I think the sense of humor in this series is just exactly what I love. I will say this particular book is a little bit fragmented just because there's quite a lot of action. You're often moving from one situation to another with very little like breathing space, but still really enjoyed listening to this audiobook. Oh, if you don't know, the Kate Daniels series is about this mercenary in a post-apocalyptic Atlanta where magic has started to come back, but it comes back in waves. So sometimes magic works, sometimes technology works, and you can never really predict which one's going to work. There's also vampires and shapeshifters and necromancers and witches, but they're all done in such a unique way that I absolutely love it. Then we have Death and Resurrection by R.A. McAvoy. So this book is about a guy who starts to sometimes cross over into the afterworld. He doesn't seem to have a lot of control over it. And I tried really hard to read this during my 12-hour reading challenge, but I just couldn't do it. I felt like the dialogue and the description was really hard to follow. The main character is Chinese American, and there is also a Native American character who I assume was going to be the love interest, but I just don't know. Was the representation of those accurate? A few things made me doubtful, and the plot was just lacking direction. I read a review that said it's more like 3 short stories, and I got the feeling I was in the second one, and I just didn't care. And then I made the decision to DNF it, and I felt so much relief. So it was clearly the right decision for me. So obviously Magic Burns is the one that I'm going to put through to the next round. So moving on to round 2, firstly we have Amy, My Daughter by Mitch Winehouse up against Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. Amy, My Daughter is a biography of Amy Winehouse written by her father. I did think the first half of this was okay, although her father kind of came across as not really knowing her very well at all, and so there wasn't really any insights into Amy Winehouse. Then the second half is all about Amy getting involved with alcohol addiction and drugs, and it got very repetitive because it kept being, you know, Amy has problems, then she's getting better, then she has problems again, then she gets better, and it just kept going on and on and on, and unfortunately you know how it's going to end because she died. But also the whole thing just felt very surface level, and he was much more involved in talking about how it impacted him and how horrible it was for him, rather than sounding particularly concerned about his daughter. So for most of this book he was trying to make himself seem like a really great father, but it just never felt entirely genuine. And as well, the second half of the book was repetitive and boring. So given that, I'm sure you can guess that I'm going to put Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb through to the next round. Okay, then we have a couple of books that are both for a younger audience. We have A Living Nightmare by Darren Shan and also Small Steps by Louis Sacher. So firstly, A Living Nightmare is the first book in the Cirque du Freak series. I picked this up because Cats and Camera was talking about it, but I do know it's also a favorite series of hardback hoarder, and I did think this was just a really fun book. It's following this young boy who ends up going to this weird circus freak show, and then it completely changes his life. What I will say is that it was incredibly short, so I feel like I listened to it, but I still didn't get very far into the story. Also, there's something that happens at the end that I can imagine that when you read it as a kid, it wouldn't really bother you, but as an adult, understanding the full ramifications, it's kind of traumatic. But overall, it was a lot of fun. The other one that I read is Small Steps by Louis Sacher. So this is kind of a sequel to Holes, which is quite a well-known book. But it doesn't really continue the story of Holes. We're just following Armpit, who was a character in the original Holes. And then another character called X-Ray is also involved. So for most of this book, Armpit is just trying to get his life back together after getting out of Camp Green Lake, which was like a youth detention center. What's the right name for that? I want to say concentration camp, but that's not right. Basically a place where they send a juvenile detention center. Is that what it's called? Anyway, he was there, he's gotten out, he's trying to get his life together. A really strong theme in this book is that you shouldn't judge people on their appearances. Armpit's kind of like a big tough looking black kid, but as I said, through the whole book he's trying to separate himself from people's perspective of him. Unfortunately, X-Ray comes along and gets him involved in this ticket scalping scheme, which causes some trouble. There's also another character in this book who is a celebrity singer, and so there's a little bit in there about teen fame, but that links in again to that same theme of like, don't judge people based on their appearances. Oh, and also Armpit's neighbor and best friend is this young girl with cerebral palsy, which also reinforces that theme. Again, I don't know about the accuracy of the representation of the cerebral palsy, but seemed like it was probably okay. The whole book is a little bit silly, so you can't really ever take it too seriously, but again, it was a lot of fun. So for these two books, picking which one would win, I think kind of hard because they're both good and both probably achieved what they were trying to achieve. I definitely will be continuing the Cirque du Freak series. I mean, both of them were strange in certain ways, so they're probably not for everybody. I think I would probably have to say I enjoyed reading... did I? They're both very close, but I think I'm going to put Small Steps through just because I thought the themes were a bit stronger than Cirque du Freak. Okay, so next we have The Memory Keeper's Daughter up against Mockingjay. Mockingjay is the third and final book in the Hunger Games trilogy, so it's a YA dystopian, and I thought that the setup was really equivalent to the first two books. You had the same emotional investment, the characters felt very real despite being put in a very unrealistic situation, and yeah, I just felt very emotionally invested. However, the second half, I think the action was a bit convoluted and nonsensical and just didn't have the structure that the Hunger Games did in the first two books. And absolutely, the epilogue was completely unnecessary, which is what I remembered. I just thought maybe on the second read, the epilogue might fit in better since I knew where it was going. And I definitely was more on board with where the love triangle ends up with on the second read. But overall, I have to say it definitely wasn't as good as the first two books, which does make me a little bit more nervous about The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes coming out very soon. However, since I did really love the first half, I do think I'm going to put that through to the next round rather than The Memory Keeper's Daughter. Just because I don't think The Memory Keeper's Daughter ever got me quite as emotionally invested as Mockingjay. Then for the final battle of round two, we have Magic Burns up against Circe. So I already talked about Magic Burns. Circe is a retelling of Greek mythology. So in the Odyssey, Odysseus runs into Circe the witch, and this story is basically elaborating on the story of Circe. I always had a bit of a connection to Odysseus's wife Penelope for obvious reasons, so I did enjoy her inclusion in the story, but that's quite personal to me. I also got a little bit annoyed when he was having an affair with Circe because, excuse me, I am waiting for you to come home. But anyway, for this story, I really loved the way that the gods were characterized. I thought the writing style fit really well with the fact that Circe is a god, so she has a very different perspective on things. And just in general, the writing was quite lovely. On the downside though, I will say that quite often I felt the story was very focused on the different men that passed through her life, and I really preferred the bits that were really her story, and I personally didn't feel like there was enough of that. I also thought sometimes the writing was a bit slow paced for me. So it's pretty hard actually to put it up against Magic Burns because I feel like a lot of people would like Circe better, but I have a very large attachment, an emotional attachment to Magic Burns. So do I go with my own feelings, or do I go with the one that's probably a better book in general? I guess I'm going to put Circe through to the next round just because I don't think the second book is the best Kate Daniels book, but I love it. Still, Circe is through to the next round. Okay, so now we're on to the semi-finals and we have two battles. The first one is Ship of Destiny up against Small Steps. I'm trying to come up with a reason why I could pretend like this is a hard decision, but the fact is that Ship of Destiny was absolutely amazing. After I finished it, I just rushed to get the audiobook for the next book in the Realm of the Elderling series. So I love Ship of Destiny, and it can't really compete with just a fun, silly book about a kid called Armpit. So, Ship of Destiny is through to the finals. Can you guys guess yet who's gonna win? Because I can. The next battle for the semi-finals is Mockingjay up against Circe. So this one's a little bit harder. I definitely felt more emotionally invested in Mockingjay, at least for the first half. But then I would say that Circe is much more creative and unique, and just the level of skill to pull all that Greek mythology together into a readable story, an interesting story. I mean, I'm not sure how interesting it would be for people who know nothing about Greek mythology, but still, I thought it was pretty good. So, I guess I'm gonna put Circe through to the finals. Okay, so that means that our final is going to be Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb up against Circe by Madeline Miller. Both of these books are really great, and I definitely recommend both of them. But if I had to pick a winner, I am going to go with Ship of Destiny. I just think that there are so many strong woman characters in Ship of Destiny and all different ages. So the main one is Althea, and for most of the book she is trying to take command of the live ship, but we've also got her mother Veronica, who plays quite a big part, and she's an older woman. Her husband's just died and she's kind of figuring out how to live in the world as it's changing. We've also got Malta, who starts out as like a spoiled little shit girl, but then learns so much and becomes so much stronger. And there's some boys and they're cool too, but like, I don't know, I just think there's so much more complexity and so much more interesting stuff going on in Ship of Destiny. Although it's interesting, both of these books do have some element of ships and the sea in them, so they have that in common. But I definitely think that Ship of Destiny deserves to win. Now we will put that up against the champion for the first half of the month, which was Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. And this is a little bit hard. I feel like this is a little bit unfair because I read Catching Fire so long ago and my memory of it has kind of been corrupted by having read Mockingjay after that, and it's set in the same world, so now my brain doesn't exactly remember where things ended. This was my problem when I was reading Catching Fire. Like, it ended and I was surprised because I hadn't remembered exactly where that book ends. Both of these series have a really big cast of characters, especially the second book of The Hunger Games is when they bring in all the different victors. And it was interesting getting to know them all, but I still feel like I got so much more attached to the characters from the live ship traders. And it was just such a satisfying ending to the series that I think Ship of Destiny is going to have to be the ultimate champion for the month. So if you haven't picked up any of the Realm of the Elderling series yet, I really recommend it. Especially the audiobooks are really well done. And like, they are quite thick books and quite dense fantasy, so I think they'd be a bit difficult to get through in physical form. But the audiobooks are so well produced that why not listen to the audiobooks? So that was my reading for April. Do let me know if you've read any of the books that I talked about today. I'd love to talk with you more about them down in the comments, or let me know if there's any of these books that you would be interested in reading in the future. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you're having a really wonderful day, keeping yourself safe, and I will see you next time.